1,000-year-old Viking textile workshop unearthed in Denmark rewrites Viking history. Archaeologists in Denmark have made a remarkable discovery that is reshaping our understanding of the Viking Age. Now let's dig deeper into the story and uncover what really happened on our AI
So I
podcast.
want you to picture a traditional Viking. Like, just go ahead and conjure up that image in your mind right now.
Yeah, I think we all know the exact picture you're talking about.
Right. Because, I mean, since you listen to this show, you're probably already well aware that the whole pop culture stereotype of the, disorganized berserker barbarian is a bit of a caricature.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge exaggeration.
But even for history buffs, I feel like the default mental image still involves a, a bearded warrior standing on the prow of a wooden longship, right? Clutching an axe, preparing to raid some unsuspecting coastal monastery.
Yeah, we definitely tend to view their entire society through the lens of those violent maritime expeditions.
Exactly. And there's a reason for that.
Well, yeah, because the historical record has heavily skewed our perception. I mean, it was primarily written by the victims of those raids.
Right. The monks weren't writing glowing reviews of their economic policies.
Exactly. We have centuries of chronicles painting them as these mysterious, chaotic forces just, emerging from the frozen north, taking what they wanted by force and vanishing.
Which creates this assumption that their entire society was based purely on plunder rather than any sort of sustainable economic foundation.
Which is completely false.
Right. And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We want to take whatever lingering remnants of that chaotic raider image you have in your head and completely dismantle them.
It's time to rethink everything.
It really is. We are analyzing a phenomenal archaeological report today. It's titled The Industrial Revolution of the Viking Age.
Such a great title.
It is. And it details this massive 1,000-year-old discovery that was recently excavated in Denmark. And honestly, it completely reorients how we need to think about the medieval Norse economy.
It does. And the stakes of this excavation are just profound. We are not talking about archaeologists unearthing, a few rusted swords or a burial mound here. They have mapped the physical footprint of a meticulously organized, highly sophisticated manufacturing sector.
Which is wild for that time period.
It's unheard of. This discovery provides the empirical data necessary to basically rewrite the economic history of the Viking Age. It proves they operated with a level of industrial foresight that we typically associate with much, much later periods in European history.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the implications, we need to leave the longships behind for a minute and ground ourselves in the actual dirt where this discovery was made.
Let's do it.
So we're traveling to a site called Søften. It's located just north of the modern city of Aarhus, situated in Denmark's mid-Jutland region.
And chronologically, just to set the scene, the artifacts and structural foundations date this settlement directly to the 7th through the 10th centuries.
So right in the thick of it.
Exactly. That places us firmly in the formative and peak years of the Viking Age.
The scale of this excavation is what really shifted my perspective when I was reading the source. Because when someone mentions a medieval archaeological site, my mind defaults to a quaint, self-sustaining village.
Sure, yeah. A small cluster of wooden longhouses surrounded by some farmland.
Right. But the site at Søften, it spans roughly 100,000 square meters.
It's massive.
It's insane. To help you visualize that, we are talking about a physical footprint the size of 14 professional soccer fields.
14, just let that sink in.
And packed into that space, archaeologists identified the foundations of 82 distinct structures, which they classify in the report as pit houses.
And that density is just staggering for the period. I mean, it firmly establishes Søften as one of the largest known Viking-era workshop complexes ever documented in Northern Europe.
But, okay, so 100,000 square meters doesn't sound like a neighborhood, right? It sounds like an industrial park or like an Amazon fulfillment center.
That's a really good analogy, actually.
But I want to play devil's advocate for a moment here, just to make sure we aren't, projecting modern capitalism onto a medieval society.
Fair enough.
People lived in highly concentrated groups for protection and community back then. So is there any chance these 82 pit houses were just a booming, densely populated residential suburb?
Well, that is the necessary first hypothesis for any archaeologist, right? You have to rule out domestic living before you jump to claiming industrial manufacturing.
Right. So how did they rule it out?
The soil composition and the artifact distribution. They provide a very clear answer. Because when you excavate a typical Viking-era residential longhouse or a village, The ground is littered with the debris of generalized daily survival.
Like what?
Well, you find remnants of hearths used for varied cooking, animal bones from meals, agricultural tools, maybe some children's toys or fishing gear.
Just the physical evidence of everyday chore.
Exactly, the clutter of daily life. But that is exactly the opposite of what was found in Søften. Yeah. The 82 pit houses totally lacked that varied domestic detritus. Instead, the structures contained a hyper-concentration of specialized tools, and they were focused entirely on one singular task.
Textile production.
Exactly, textile production.
Which brings us to the structures themselves, because I have to admit, calling them pit houses sounds a bit primitive.
It really does.
Like, it sounds like people are just digging holes and sitting in the dirt weaving.
Right, the terminology can be really misleading. So a pit house, or a Grubenhaus, is a semi-subterranean structure.
Okay.
The builders would dig a rectangular pit about 1 meter deep into the earth, and then they'd build a timber-framed, thatched roof structure over it.
Okay, but what is the mechanical advantage of working in a basement? I mean, why go through the labor of excavating 1 meter of solid Danish soil just to set up a loom?
It basically comes down to early climate control.
Wait, climate control? In the Viking Age?
Yeah. It's about the physical properties of the materials they were working with. If you were spinning and weaving wool, and especially flax for linen, in a dry, drafty, above-ground timber hall, the ambient air dries out the fibers.
Oh, I see.
And dry fibers become brittle. When you apply tension to brittle yarn on a loom, the threads constantly snap, which ruins the cloth and wastes immense amounts of time.
That sounds like a nightmare for a weaver.
Exactly. But by digging down into the earth, the pit house traps the ground's natural moisture. It creates this stable, highly humid microclimate that keeps the fibers supple and pliable during the intensive weaving process.
That is just brilliant. It's a purpose-built architectural solution to a very specific manufacturing problem.
It really is.
They are literally engineering the environment to maximize the yield of their raw materials.
And the sheer scale of those 82 climate-controlled workshops confirms this is not just a local cottage industry.
Right, 82 of them.
You do not invest the massive caloric energy required to build and maintain 14 soccer fields worth of specialized infrastructure just to weave winter cloaks for the local villagers,
Oh, definitely not.
This was an organized manufacturing center designed to produce a massive surplus of textiles.
And here is where the source material paints such a vivid picture of a Viking assembly line. Because excavators didn't just find the empty pits, right?
No, they pulled thousands of individual artifacts from this site.
Thousands. And the researchers emphasized that workers were completing the entire textile supply chain right there on site. They were processing the raw fibers, spinning the thread, weaving the fabric, and finishing the goods all within this single massive complex.
And the artifacts themselves tell us how meticulously they approached this. The excavators uncovered countless spindle whorls, for example.
Okay, for those of us who aren't familiar with medieval weaving techniques, how does a spindle whorl actually function? I'm picturing like a spinning wheel from Sleeping Beauty.
Not quite a wheel. A spindle whorl is essentially a small weighted disc with a hole in the center, typically made of stone, bone, or fired clay.
Okay.
You slide it onto a wooden stick called a spindle. When you attach raw combed wool to the stick and give it a spin, the whorl acts as a flywheel.
Oh, interesting.
Its weight provides the rotational momentum that twists the loose fibers into a tight, continuous thread.
So it's utilizing centrifugal force to automate the twisting process.
Exactly. But the really fascinating part is the physics of the whorl itself.
Oh, so.
The mass and diameter of the whorl directly dictate the thickness of the resulting thread.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A heavy, wide whorl will pull more fiber and create a thick, coarse yarn, the kind suitable for heavy sailcloth or winter blankets. But a very small, light whorl spins faster and creates a fine, delicate thread for higher quality garments.
So they could control the output.
Yes, and the excavators at Søften found whorls of very specific standardized weights.
Which implies quality control. They aren't just making random balls of yarn, they are manufacturing specific grades of thread for specific end products.
Exactly. And they also found thousands of loom weights, which give us insight into the weaving process itself. Because the Vikings used what is called a warp-weighted loom.
I think I have seen pictures of these. Instead of a horizontal frame like a modern mechanical loom, it is a vertical frame leaning against a wall, right?
That is correct. The vertical threads, which are known as the warp, hang down from the top beam.
Okay.
And in order to weave the horizontal threads through them, those vertical threads must be kept under constant, even tension. So the weavers would tie bundles of the vertical threads to clay donuts, the loom weights, which hang near the floor.
So gravity is doing all the work of keeping the whole textile tight and uniform.
Yes, and the presence of thousands of these weights alongside the standardized spindle whorls scattered across dozens of nearly identical workshops. It provides the physical proof of a complex division of labor.
And that's what blew my mind. Because the division of labor feels like such a post-industrial revolution concept. You picture Henry Ford's assembly line, not an 8th century Danish settlement.
Right, but the underlying economic principle is exactly the same. Instead of one artisan spending weeks shearing the sheep, washing the wool, carding it, spinning it, and then slowly weaving a single tunic.
Which would take forever.
Exactly. You compartmentalize the tasks. You have specialists dedicated solely to spinning thread, passing their output to specialists dedicated solely to operating the warp-weighted looms.
Oh.
It drastically increases production speed and ensures a standardized final product.
See, I am struggling to understand the logistics of how you manage something like this in a pre-literate society.
It's definitely a puzzle.
Right, because to operate 14 soccer fields of workshops, you need raw materials flowing in, finished goods flowing out, and workers being fed. We are talking about centralized management, but how do you act as the CEO of a Viking textile conglomerate without written ledgers, spreadsheets, or modern communication?
Well, you manage it through the physical layout of the site and the standardization of the tools. The architecture actually acts as the managerial framework.
Wait, how does the architecture do that?
By building 82 identical pit houses, you create a physical blueprint for production quotas. If you know one pit house can produce a certain yardage of cloth per week, you can calculate the total output based on how many houses are actively smoking from their hearths.
That is incredibly clever.
And while they didn't have, double-entry bookkeeping, they utilized runic tally sticks and standardized weights and measures.
Okay, so they had systems.
Absolutely. The overseers, whether they were local chieftains, a royal authority, or maybe a consortium of wealthy merchants, they maintained tight control over the supply of raw wool and flax entering the site, which allowed them to predict the output.
Okay, so we have established this staggering manufacturing capability, which leaves this operation with a massive surplus of standardized textiles.
A huge surplus.
And a surplus demands a market, right? The local Danish population would be saturated almost immediately with that much cloth.
Oh, for sure. You don't build a factory of this scale without a pre-existing, or at least highly anticipated, export strategy.
So we have to follow the goods, which means following the money. And scattered among those loom weights and spindle whorls, the archaeologists found foreign currency that completely obliterates the idea of an isolated northern society.
The numismatic evidence, the coins they found, it provides a literal map of their trade networks.
It's incredible. They found Arabic dirhams originating from the Middle East. They found Frankish deniers minted in regions corresponding to modern-day France, and currency from areas that are now modern-day Germany.
But it is important to understand how this money functioned within the Viking economy, because the presence of an Arabic dirham in a Danish pit house does not mean a weaver went down to a local market and bought a loaf of bread with Middle Eastern currency.
Right, because the face value of the coin-like, whose face is stamped on it, didn't matter to them.
Exactly. The Viking economy during this period was primarily a bullion or hack silver economy.
Hack silver.
Yeah, they valued the coins purely for their weight in silver. If a merchant needed to pay for a transaction, they would literally hack a silver coin into pieces and weigh out the required amount on a small folding scale.
That is so visceral. But why were textiles so highly valued that merchants from the Abbasid Caliphate or the Carolingian Empire were willing to part with their silver for it?
Well, textiles, particularly standardized woolen cloth, functioned almost as a fiat currency themselves across the North Atlantic and European trade routes.
Really? Cloth as currency?
Yeah. The Norse produced a specific type of woven wool called vadmal. It was so heavily standardized in its width and thread count that legally binding contracts, taxes, and debts could be settled in measured lengths of vadmal.
Oh, wow. I guess because everybody needs durable, warm clothing. And unlike grain, it doesn't rot quickly, making it a perfectly stable commodity to hold wealth.
Exactly. Furthermore, the maritime expansion of the era created a relentless demand for sailcloth.
Oh, the longships.
Yes. A single Viking longship required an absolutely massive, durable wool sail. It took more man-hours to weave the sail than it did to chop the timber and construct the entire hull of the ship.
That is a crazy statistic, more time on the sail than the ship itself.
It's true. And the European and Eastern markets also desired high-quality northern wool for clothing. So the presence of Arabic silver proves the goods produced in Søften were moving down the rivers of Eastern Europe, crossing the Black and Caspian Seas and tapping directly into the Silk Road.
Okay, but the logistics of moving all that product requires a major distribution hub, right? And the geography of Søften is no accident. The source highlights that this megafactory was deliberately located in close proximity to a settlement called Aros.
And listeners might recognize that name, actually, as Aros is the early medieval trading center that eventually grew into the modern Danish city of Aarhus.
Right, so if we think about this in terms of modern supply chain logistics, Søften is the inland manufacturing facility. It has the space for the 82 workshops and the environmental conditions for the pit houses. But Aros, situated on the coast, is the international shipping terminal.
That proximity is the key to the entire operation. The overseers could mass-produce the textiles in the controlled environment of Søften, load the finished vadmel onto carts or small riverine boats, and move it incredibly efficiently to the deep-water port at Aros.
Makes total sense.
And from there, merchant vessels carried the goods across the Baltic Sea, down the Russian river networks, or south to the Frankish kingdoms. Søften was intentionally integrated into a global distribution network.
Which really brings us to the ultimate question of what this means for the history books. We started this deep dive talking about the guy with the axe on the longship.
Right, the barbarian stereotype.
Exactly. And the historian quoted in our source material, Caspar H. Anderson from the Mosgard Museum, states that this discovery proves the Viking Age was, quote, far from being an uncivilized, barbaric, or backward period.
The findings at Søften really force a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I mean, it requires us to view the Vikings not as peripheral raiders, but as major players in global macroeconomics.
It makes me wonder if our entire historical focus has been upside down this whole time. Like, were the famous Viking raids just the loud, aggressive acquisition department of a society that was actually built on the backs of international textile tycoons?
That's a great way to put it.
Did we focus on the sensational violence and completely miss the massive corporate infrastructure funding it?
Well, the two aspects of their society are deeply intertwined. As we discussed, building a fleet of longships requires immense capital.
Right.
The ships, the iron weapons, the provisions for long voyages, these required vast amounts of resources.
You can't just wake up one morning and decide to raid England. You need a massive line of credit to launch that fleet.
Exactly. The sustainable, organized industries like the textile megafactory at Søften provided the economic foundation that made the maritime expansion possible in the first place.
Right. You need the factories to build the sails.
And then the raids brought back raw wealth silver, captives to supplement the labor force, and luxury goods. That wealth was then pumped back into the domestic economy, funding further industrial output.
It's a feedback loop.
Exactly. The warriors grabbing the headlines in the monastic chronicles were simply the sharp, violent edge of a deeply complex, highly organized logistical machine.
The factories were the engine, and the longships were just the vehicle. It is just incredible to think about a society simultaneously operating on the absolute frontier of maritime exploration while managing this level of centralized manufacturing at home.
It's truly a testament to their organizational skills.
And the most exciting part is that this is still an unfolding investigation, isn't it?
Yeah.
The source notes that researchers will be analyzing these thousands of artifacts for a very long time before they publish all their final conclusions.
Oh, the data extraction process will be exhaustive.
I can imagine.
Yeah, analyzing the wear patterns on the loom weights, determining the exact chemical composition of the glass beads to trace their origin, and mapping the precise layout of the pit houses, it will yield decades of academic debate.
Well, eventually, the artifacts from Søften will be displayed to the public at Denmark's Mosgard Museum. So if you ever find yourself in Aarhus, it is going to be an absolute must visit to stand in front of the physical evidence of this medieval industrial revolution.
Highly recommend it.
We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope exploring the mechanisms of this 100,000 square meter factory showed you the value of looking past the Hollywood stereotypes to uncover the sophisticated reality operating beneath the surface.
A rigorous look at the archaeological data constantly reminds us that human beings in the past were just as capable of complex organization and innovation as we are today.
So true. I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you go about the rest of your day. Think back to that massive industrial complex sitting quietly under the dirt in Denmark for 1,000 years. Because it was hidden, it allowed us to completely misjudge the economic reality of an entire civilization, comfortably writing them off as mere barbarians. So what other historically maligned, supposedly primitive societies are we currently completely misunderstanding simply because we haven't dug deep enough to find their factories?
Okay, one question for you. Did this discovery completely change your opinion of the Viking? If they were running organized textile factories and trading with the Middle East, should history books place as much emphasis on their business achievements as their legendary raids and battles? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.